Hey everyone, I noticed a lot of you who are watching and enjoying the content aren't subscribed yet. If you love spine-chilling stories, creepy encounters, and unexplained mysteries, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on the next terrifying upload. It really helps the channel grow and lets me keep bringing you more of the content you love. What started out as a simple Tinder date ended up feeling like a nightmare, a real one, and I still can't fully explain it. It's been months, and the whole thing still haunts me. So let me backtrack a little and set the scene for you. It all started about 3 months ago. I was on Tinder, scrolling through the usual profiles. I was looking for someone fun, someone I could vibe with. You know the drill, people posting selfies with their dogs or pictures from their last beach vacation. Nothing wrong with that, but honestly, after a while, they all start blending together. But then, I came across Tom's profile. He wasn't my usual type, but something about his bio caught my attention. It wasn't flashy, no motivational quotes or cryptic phrases. It was simple, straightforward. He seemed down to earth. And I liked that. We matched, and the conversation started pretty standard. Small talk, work, hobbies, nothing too crazy. But then, he threw in some weird personal details. Not in a creepy way, just random thoughts that made me laugh and feel like I was talking to someone who actually knew how to hold a conversation. I've always been skeptical of dating apps, but something about Tom felt different. He wasn't bragging about how much money he made or how many countries he'd visited. He just seemed normal. I guess that's what hooked me. After chatting for a couple of days, we made plans to meet up for dinner. He suggested a place that was a little out of the way, kind of a hidden gem, he said. I'm not one for fancy restaurants, so when he told me about this quiet spot outside the city, I was intrigued. Honestly, I liked that it sounded chill. So, he offered to pick me up, and here's where I'll admit, I should have listened to that little voice in my head telling me to be cautious. I'm not big on letting someone pick me up, but I didn't think much of it. We were already getting along well enough, and he seemed trustworthy. The night of the date, I was ready. I'd spent a little extra time on my outfit, making sure I looked good but didn't look like I was trying too hard. I was nervous, but not in the way you'd expect for a first date. Something about it just felt off. I ignored it, chalked it up to typical first date jitters. So I grabbed my bag, walked out the door, and headed to his car. He was already waiting outside. When I got in, he gave me this warm smile, and I could tell he was trying to make me feel comfortable, which I appreciated. His car wasn't anything flashy. It was a bit old but clean, and I didn't think much of it. We started chatting immediately about random things, our favorite shows, things we like to do for fun. He was still the same person I'd been talking to online. But as we drove out of the city, things started to feel a little off. The further we drove, the quieter he became. I don't know why, but it started to make me nervous. It wasn't that he was being rude or anything, he just wasn't talking. He seemed kind of distant. I'd ask him questions about his life, his job, his family, his hobbies, and his answers were short, almost robotic. He was polite, but it wasn't the engaging, warm person I'd been chatting with online. It was like something had changed as soon as we left the city. I tried to push the feeling away. Maybe he was just shy, right? Maybe he had an off day. It happens. So, I kept the conversation going, but he wasn't really giving me much. I felt like I was doing all the talking, but he wasn't contributing much to the conversation. And that was the first red flag. Then, we started driving down smaller roads. At first, it wasn't that weird, but after a while, I realized we were way out of the city. We were driving down narrow roads, the kind that don't really have any streetlights. The further we went, the more I started noticing how quiet everything was. I looked out the window, but there was nothing but trees, no houses, no other cars. It felt off. The city lights had long faded behind us, and now there was only darkness ahead. I didn't know why, but something about that just didn't sit right with me. Why wouldn't he just tell me? Why the cryptic answer? But instead of pushing it further, I told myself to relax. Maybe it was a surprise. I didn't want to come off as paranoid, so I tried to calm myself down and play it cool. But then, we turned onto a gravel road. And that's when I really started feeling uneasy. This wasn't some scenic route to a fancy restaurant. It was a dirt path surrounded by trees. No signs, no lights, just trees and more trees. The car's headlights cast long shadows, but there was nothing else. I glanced at him again, hoping for some reassurance, but he just kept driving, staring straight ahead. I asked again, my voice shaky now, "Where are we going?" He didn't respond. He just turned the music down and kept driving. I tried not to freak out. Maybe I was just overthinking it. But the further we went, the more I realized I didn't recognize anything. This wasn't a place I'd ever been to. In fact, I'd never seen a road like this before. No houses, no signs, no people, just trees. And it was getting darker. I started to wonder if this was some kind of joke, like maybe we were going to a haunted restaurant or something. But deep down, I knew this wasn't funny anymore. Finally, we reached a stop. The gravel under the tires stopped and we were surrounded by nothing but darkness. The trees were so thick I couldn't see anything in front of me. There were no lights, no houses, just an eerie silence. I tried to open my mouth to say something, but before I could speak, he turned off the engine. I looked over at him. He wasn't smiling anymore. His face was calm, too calm. I asked again, "Where are we?" His voice was quiet, almost as if he was whispering to himself, "You'll regret this." At that moment I froze. I don't know why, but I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. My hands started to sweat, my heart racing. I had no idea what was going on, but everything in me told me this was wrong. This wasn't a dinner date anymore. I needed to get out, fast. I didn't even think twice. I opened the door and bolted. I wasn't going to wait for him to make another move. I ran without looking back, my heart pounding in my chest. My feet were heavy on the gravel, but I didn't care. I just had to get out of there. I ran for what felt like forever, my legs burning, my chest tight. I didn't know where I was going, but I didn't stop. The sound of my footsteps echoed through the trees, but I kept running. And that's when I saw it, a light in the distance, a small, faint light. It looked like a flashlight, and I knew I had to get to it. I kept running, focusing on the light, but just before I could reach it, I heard something behind me, the sound of footsteps. They were getting closer. I didn't dare turn around. I ran faster. The light was getting closer. Then I reached the source of the light. It was a small gas station, the kind with a single pump and an old sign flickering in the dark. I ran inside without even looking back, gasping for breath. The cashier at the counter looked at me like I was crazy, but I didn't care. I begged him to call me a ride, told him there was someone chasing me. He looked at me like I was a lunatic, but he made the call. And I didn't stop until I was safely in a taxi, heading back to my apartment. The next day, I got a text from Tom. It was short. "You're not safe." My heart dropped. I couldn't even comprehend what I was reading. My hands were shaking as I stared at the screen. What the hell? I blocked his number immediately, not even thinking twice. But then the weirdest thing happened. I checked the timestamp on the message, and it was hours after I had left the woods. Hours. That made absolutely no sense. I'd been long gone, safe and sound in the gas station, well away from him. How could he have known what was going on in those hours if he wasn't still out there, watching? My stomach churned, and I couldn't push the feeling of dread away. I tried to tell myself it was a mistake, maybe even just some weird glitch. But it didn't feel like that. It felt wrong. I never heard from him again. I mean, I blocked him, so it's not like I was checking for texts, but still, I had this nagging feeling that something was off, something deeper than just a weird date gone wrong. I didn't want to think about it, didn't want to dig into it. The more I thought about it, the more it felt like my mind was playing tricks on me. A week passed, and I tried to get back to my normal life, but the thoughts kept creeping back. I had a hard time falling asleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that empty road, those trees closing in, Tom's face, blank, unreadable, staring ahead. I would think about that voice, how it was so quiet but so unnerving. How the hell had I ended up in that situation? But then one night, I got a notification from my social media, an image. Just a simple photo, nothing too special, but my heart stopped when I saw it. It was a picture of a location I recognized. It was the woods, the same spot where I had been. I stared at the photo. In the background, I could see the car, Tom's car, parked off the gravel path, and standing next to it was a figure. A figure I didn't recognize, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the caption. It read, "She's close." I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe I thought it was a joke, some sick prank, but I felt like I couldn't breathe, like the walls were closing in on me. The whole thing felt surreal, but my gut told me this wasn't just a coincidence. Whoever posted that photo knew exactly what had happened, and they were still watching me. They were still out there. But here's the part that really broke me. I checked the timestamp on the photo. It was taken a few hours ago, today. That's when it hit me. It wasn't just Tom I needed to be worried about. The entire time I'd been thinking I was the victim, I was just a piece in something way bigger, something much darker. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to know what was going on. So I did something stupid, something I know I shouldn't have done. I went to the location. I drove back to the woods, thinking maybe if I could just see it with my own eyes, I could make sense of it. I don't know what I was expecting, but when I pulled up to the spot where I'd been dropped off that night, I was almost relieved to find it empty. No car, no people, just trees, darkness, and the kind of eerie stillness that makes you feel like you're being watched. I stayed in my car for a while, too scared to get out, but nothing happened. No one approached. No one was lurking in the shadows. But that's when I noticed something. My phone, it buzzed. A notification. I checked it without thinking, some new message, probably from a friend. But when I opened it, I froze. It was from Tom. It was a photo. A picture of my car, a picture of me sitting in my car, parked in that exact spot. And this time the caption was different. It said, "We've been waiting for you." I couldn't breathe. My mind was racing, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't a game anymore. This wasn't just some weird Tinder date gone wrong. I wasn't dealing with some creepy guy with a messed up sense of humor. I was dealing with something far more dangerous. I don't know what happened after that. I remember locking the doors, driving as fast as I could and not stopping until I was home. But even then, I didn't feel safe. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, that I wasn't alone in my own apartment. I turned on every light, checked every window, and even locked the bathroom door when I showered. And here's where it gets even worse. That night, when I thought I could finally get some sleep, my phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. It was a photo. But this time, it wasn't just a random picture. It was a picture of me, taken from inside my apartment, from behind the curtain. That was the last straw. I didn't know who these people were, but I wasn't about to wait around to find out. I packed a bag, left everything behind, and stayed with a friend. I blocked every number I could think of, deleted all my social media, and made sure no one could trace me. It's been weeks since then, and I've been bouncing between friends' places, trying to stay hidden. I don't trust anyone anymore. Every time I hear a car pull up outside, I freeze. Every time I get a message, I check the name, expecting it to be another photo. I don't know who Tom really is. I don't know who the people behind the messages are, or why they were watching me. But I do know this. I'm never going to feel safe again. I don't know if they're still out there, waiting for me, but I sure as hell can't ignore the fact that they've been one step ahead of me this whole time. I wish I could forget about that night, about Tom and the twisted game he played, but I can't, and I don't know if I ever will. I have to share this because honestly, it's been haunting me for a while now. If you're into dating horror stories, you might want to buckle up, because this one's a ride. It's not some over-the-top ghosts or monsters type of thing. No, this one's different. It's real, and it's been sticking with me for longer than I'd like to admit. It all started about a year ago when I matched with this girl on Tinder named Jessica. Now, let me set the scene for you. Tinder can be a total roller coaster. You know what I mean. You get some good matches, some weird ones, and a few that you just forget about after a couple of days. But this one felt different. Jessica's profile was pretty standard at first glance. She had a few cute pictures, nothing that screamed fake, but something about the way she wrote her bio stood out. She wasn't the usual, "Hey, I'm fun and love adventure" kind of girl. No, she was different. Her bio was witty, a little sarcastic, and kind of dark, but in a way that made me want to know more. There was this odd balance between being cool and mysterious, which made me swipe right instantly. We matched within seconds, and it was one of those conversations that felt surprisingly natural. No awkward one-word responses, no cringy pickup lines, just real talk. She was funny, she had opinions, and she seemed totally normal. Not only that, but she seemed genuinely interested in me too. I've been on enough Tinder dates to know when someone's just filling time, but she wasn't like that. It felt real. We talked about movies, music, random life stuff, and before I knew it, we were planning to meet up in person. She suggested this coffee shop in a part of town I wasn't super familiar with. I looked it up online, checked reviews. It seemed nice, cozy, a place with low-key vibes. Not the type of spot you go to impress, but the kind of place you go to have a good conversation. I was sold. We agreed on PM that Friday. The day of the date, I remember feeling excited. I'm not usually the type to get nervous, but something about this one felt a little different. Maybe because everything had been so easy up until then. I'm no dating expert, but I knew this girl was different. Her messages weren't the usual half-assed stuff people send when they're just bored, and she actually asked questions about my life, not just some generic, "what do you do for a living" type of thing. We talked about everything, from the dumbest internet memes to deep thoughts about the future. So, Friday rolls around. I get to the coffee shop at 6:55 p.m., feeling all right, maybe a little jittery, but nothing out of the ordinary. I walk in, check out the place. It's a small, dimly lit cafe with cozy chairs and a few scattered tables. It's not crowded, but there are a couple of people here. I figure she might be a little late, so I grab a seat by the window, facing the door. I can see the entire room from where I sit. I check my phone again, no new messages. I shoot her a quick text. Hey, just got here. I'll be at the window. I hit send and try to chill for a minute. The minutes start to tick by, and nothing. Maybe she's just running a little late, right? I'm starting to feel a little dumb, but I give her the benefit of the doubt. People get busy. The world doesn't revolve around me. So I wait. 10 minutes, nothing. I'm starting to get frustrated now. I open the app again to check her profile, thinking maybe she'll have messaged me there. But when I open it, something's off. Her profile is gone, just completely wiped out. I know that sometimes people delete their accounts or unmatch, but this felt different. Her name, pictures, bio, everything was gone. I checked her phone number again just to be sure I wasn't messing this up, but nope, it's the same number she'd given me. Still nothing. At this point, I'm beginning to feel like a total idiot. Am I being pranked? I know people on Tinder do that kind of stuff, but this wasn't some cheap trick. She seemed real. The conversations felt real. So why would she just vanish like that? Maybe she's having second thoughts, maybe something came up. But then again, why would she delete everything? Why not just message me and cancel? Another 10 minutes pass, and I'm still staring at my phone. My stomach's starting to do flip-flops. Something feels off. I stand up and walk around the cafe, trying to look casual. But now I'm really thinking she's ghosted me. I even checked the bathrooms, no sign of her anywhere. I mean, I would have seen her by now, right? She's not some invisible being who can just slip through walls. The frustration starts to turn into this weird, uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach. So I leave the cafe and start walking to my car. I'm just about to pull out of the parking lot when I get a text. I don't recognize the number, but it's from Jessica's phone. I was there. I've been watching you for weeks. I freeze. It takes me a solid minute to process what I just read. My heart starts beating faster, my mind racing. Is this some kind of sick joke? My phone shakes in my hand as I reread the message a couple of times. This couldn't be real, could it? I text back immediately. What? Who is this? But the reply never comes. My mind starts running through all the possibilities. Could it be a prank? Maybe it's one of those situations where a friend of mine has gotten my number and decided to mess with me. But even if that's the case, why would they text that? Why the weird "I've been watching you" line? I try to shake it off, but now I'm in full-on paranoia mode. I lock the doors of my car, start the engine, and drive off. My head's still spinning as I head home. I can't concentrate. Every car behind me looks suspicious. Every shadow I pass feels like it's hiding something. I just want to get home and get out of my head. When I get home, I sit in my driveway for a minute, checking my phone again. Nothing new. But then I get another message. I'm in your driveway. My breath catches in my throat. I look out of the window to the empty street. No cars, no movement, nothing. But that message, there's no denying it. It's as if they knew exactly where I was. I'm gripping my phone so hard that my knuckles turn white. I shoot a text back. Stop, who is this? But there's no reply. I don't know what to do. I don't want to call the cops just yet. What if it's nothing? What if it's just some prank and I'm overreacting? But then the next message comes. Stop looking. I can see you. I freeze. I don't even know what to think anymore. My eyes dart to every window in the house. I try to act normal, but I know something is off. Something feels wrong. I lock every window and door, turn off all the lights, and try to stay as quiet as possible. The rest of the night is a blur. I sit there in the dark, waiting for something, anything to happen. But nothing does. The silence is maddening. The next day, I check my phone again. Nothing from Jessica, nothing from that number. I try to search the number online. Nothing. No records, no social media links. It's like the number doesn't even exist. For the next few days, I don't hear anything. I try to move on, but it's impossible. I delete my Tinder account, but I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. Every time I'm out, I feel like someone's behind me. Every time I check my phone, I wonder if I'm going to see another creepy message. A week goes by, then another. It's been months now, but the paranoia never really left. I still think about that night. I still think about the text message. And to this day, I don't know what happened. I'll never know. All I know is that some part of me will always feel like I'm being watched. I thought I knew what I was doing when I signed up for Tinder. I mean, I'd done this enough times before, chatted with guys, met up for casual dates and just let whatever happened, happen. But this one was different. It was supposed to be an easy, fun night out, but it turned into something much darker than I ever could have expected. I can't even explain how quickly things went from normal to completely off the rails. It all started with Jack. He was one of those guys who had the perfect profile, chiseled jaw, just the right amount of scruff, a mix of casual selfies and pictures from his travels. He looked like he had it together, Honestly, I thought I might have finally matched with someone who wasn't just another guy looking to waste time. We texted a bit, exchanged some banter, and decided to meet up for dinner. Pretty standard stuff. I was running a little late when I showed up at the restaurant, but when I walked in, I spotted Jack right away. He was sitting at a small table near the back, scrolling through his phone. He looked just like his photos, handsome, easygoing. There was something about him, though, that made me hesitate. Not a bad vibe, but more like a weird feeling in the pit of my stomach. I brushed it off. I mean, who doesn't get a little nervous on a first date? The dinner itself was fine. Nothing special, but decent enough. We talked about our jobs, our hobbies, how we both hated the gym but forced ourselves to go anyway. We laughed over a couple of glasses of wine, and he was charming enough. By the end of the meal, I didn't feel an instant spark, but I wasn't disappointed either. I thought maybe we could be friends. Nothing wrong with that. Then, Jack's phone rang. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal. People get calls during dinner all the time, right? But the way Jack's face changed when he looked at the screen caught my attention. He glanced at it for a moment, then abruptly picked it up, his voice dropping into a serious tone. I couldn't hear what the person on the other end was saying, but Jack started nodding, his face turning pale. His hand was shaking slightly as he put the phone back down on the table. "Sorry about that," he said, his voice almost too calm. "I really need to go. A friend of mine is in some trouble. I'll take care of it, but I don't think I'll be able to finish the date." I wasn't sure what to think. The way he was acting didn't exactly scream urgent. It felt more like he was looking for an excuse to get away, but I wasn't the type of person to call him out on it. I figured if he had to go, he had to go. It wasn't that big of a deal, but still, something didn't sit right with me. His sudden mood change was hard to ignore. "Do you want me to come with you?" I asked, half joking but also sort of serious. He hesitated for just a second, his eyes darting around as if he was weighing his options. Then he shrugged, a small, nervous laugh escaping him. "I'm not sure it's safe for you to come along," he said, trying to sound reassuring. "But if you don't mind, I could use some company. It's a bit of a drive, but you don't have to get out of the car if you don't want to. I'll just be a minute." I agreed. I mean, I didn't have plans afterward, and it didn't sound like a bad idea to just tag along. Maybe he really did have a friend in trouble, and I figured I could just chill in the car while he handled whatever situation he was dealing with. It didn't feel completely right, but it didn't feel wrong either. So, we hopped into his car, and he started driving. The city quickly faded behind us, and we hit a more rural area. The streets grew darker and emptier, and my stomach started to churn. "Where are we going?" I asked, trying to hide the concern in my voice. "Don't worry, it's just outside the city. We're almost there," he said, his eyes on the road, his expression unreadable. The longer we drove, the more uncomfortable I felt. The roads were winding, with barely any lights on the sides. There was nothing but trees and the occasional rundown building. We were getting further and further out, and my mind started running through all the possibilities. What if this was some kind of weird setup? What if he was taking me somewhere alone to pull some strange stunt? My anxiety was starting to peak, but I didn't want to overreact. Maybe he really was helping a friend. It could all be fine. But the longer the drive went on, the more I felt like I was out of my depth. The atmosphere in the car felt off. The silence stretched out for minutes, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional turn. Jack wasn't talking much, and neither was I. It didn't help that I didn't know where we were anymore. Finally, after what felt like forever, we arrived at an old building. I didn't know what to expect, but it sure as hell wasn't this. The building was huge but clearly abandoned. It was surrounded by overgrown grass, and the windows were dark and boarded up. There were no lights anywhere in sight. Jack stopped the car and turned off the engine, but before I could say anything, he looked at me, his eyes wide. "I'll be right back," he said, as if everything was perfectly normal. "Stay in the car. I won't be long." I watched him get out of the car and walk toward the building, his steps slow and purposeful. My heart started racing, and I was left alone in the car, unsure of what to do. I couldn't just sit here. I had to know what was going on. But something told me that if I left the car, things might go south very quickly. I waited for what felt like forever. My fingers drummed nervously on the dashboard, and I kept glancing over at the dark building. Every time a noise echoed from the woods, my body tensed. I kept telling myself to relax, but the quietness of the place unnerved me. After what felt like an eternity, Jack returned to the car. His face looked different, pale and slightly flushed, his eyes almost gleaming. The smile that spread across his face was nothing like the relaxed grin he had earlier. This smile was unsettling. He opened the door, sliding back into the seat next to me. He didn't say anything at first, just looked out of the windshield for a moment, as if trying to gather his thoughts. Then he turned toward me. "Now it's just us," he said, his voice low, almost too calm. I froze. Something wasn't right. This wasn't a situation I had signed up for. This wasn't even close to what I'd imagined when I agreed to come along. I tried to process what was happening, but it felt like my mind was moving too slowly. I wanted to get out of the car, but I didn't know where I was. I didn't know if he had friends nearby, if he was planning something worse. He hadn't even said where we were. "Jack," I started, my voice shaking. "What is this?" He just stared at me, not answering. He didn't need to. His smile told me everything. He had lured me here, away from the city, away from everything I knew. There was no friend in trouble. There never had been. That's when the real terror set in. I realized that I was stuck with a man who had planned this whole thing. He had set up the date. He had played the part of a concerned guy, pretending there was some emergency just to get me alone. I didn't know what he wanted, but I was too scared to find out. I felt my breath quicken as I looked around for an escape route. But there was nothing. The car was locked. The headlights barely cut through the darkness outside. I had no idea what he might do next, but everything inside me screamed to leave. "Please," I whispered, "just let me go." Jack didn't respond. His smile stayed locked in place, but his eyes said everything. He was enjoying this. The fear in me, the uncertainty, it fed into whatever sick game he was playing. I don't know how long we stayed there, but somehow I found the courage to act. My heart was pounding, my hands shaking, but I had to try. I yanked on the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic swelled in me. How had I let this happen? How had I gotten so far into the situation? That's when he spoke again, and his words still haunt me to this day. "You're not going anywhere." At that moment, I realized the gravity of the situation. He had me trapped, but I had no choice but to act fast. I hit the unlock button on the door, shoved it open, and ran. I didn't look back. I didn't care what direction I was running in, just as long as it was away from him. I can't tell you how long I ran, but I eventually stumbled onto a main road where a passing car stopped to help. I was beyond shaken by then. I couldn't even speak properly, but somehow I made it out of there. The rest of the night was a blur. I called the cops, but by the time they got there, Jack had disappeared. They found nothing at the building, no signs of anyone being there at all. It was as if he had never existed. I don't know what he wanted, but I do know that it's something I'll never forget. Jack hasn't tried to contact me again. I deleted Tinder and haven't looked back. I'm just glad I made it out. I never thought Tinder would lead me into something like this. At first, it just seemed like a way to pass the time, casual chats, memes, the occasional attempt at flirting. I didn't expect it to turn into anything weird, but then again, that's the thing about Tinder, right? You never really know what's going to happen. This story starts with Emma, a girl I matched with on the app. Her profile was simple, nothing too flashy, just a few pictures of her laughing, a description about enjoying life and being into food, music, and travel. We hit it off right away. She was charming, funny, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. Her messages weren't just, "Hey, what's up," like the typical ones I'd get. She asked thoughtful questions, made witty comments, and before I knew it, we'd been texting for days. By the end of the week, we decided to meet up. She suggested a festival happening downtown that weekend, an outdoor event with food trucks, live music, and local vendors. I thought it sounded great. It wasn't too far from my place, and I liked the idea of an easygoing first date. Nothing too formal, just a chance to hang out and see how we got along in person. So, we set a time, 6 p.m. on Saturday. When I showed up, I was early, which is pretty much my thing. I don't like being late. The festival was bustling. People walking around with bags of food, groups laughing at street performers, and the hum of chatter filling the air. I made my way through the crowd, looking for her. I didn't have to look too hard. I spotted her sitting on one of the big inflatable bean bags they'd set up near one of the food trucks. Her head tilted toward the sky like she was soaking in the vibe. She waved me over, and I waved back, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. She stood up when I got close, and the first thing that struck me was how different she looked from her pictures. Better, honestly. There was something magnetic about her presence. Her smile was wide, genuine, but there was something in her eyes that felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it. It wasn't a bad feeling, just this nagging sense that I was being studied. But I brushed it off. I was probably just nervous. We exchanged greetings, talked about how excited we were to be there, and then set off to grab some food. The festival was crowded, but it had this laid-back vibe. We tried a few food trucks, shared a bunch of laughs, and spent the first hour just talking about everything and nothing. It was fun, light, nothing out of the ordinary. I thought maybe we could hang out like this every weekend. I didn't want to overthink it, but she was easy to talk to, and it felt like we clicked. Then came the idea of a game. Out of nowhere, Emma suggested we play a scavenger hunt. I wasn't sure if she was joking at first, but she pulled out her phone and showed me a list of clues she'd come up with. At first, I thought it was a fun way to explore the festival. She was enthusiastic about it, so I went along with it. The clues were simple at first. Find a food stand with the best tacos, check out the vintage vinyl booth. Basic stuff, nothing strange. I started to enjoy it. We laughed, joked around, and I felt like things were going really well. But then the clues started to get a little weird. One of the next ones took us to a park bench by a fountain near the entrance of the festival. The thing is, I had already sat there earlier in the day, just to kill time before meeting up with Emma. I hadn't mentioned it to her, and it was a random spot, so I found it strange that the game would lead us there. But I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence. The next clue was even stranger. It directed us to a booth that was selling quirky little trinkets. I'd passed that booth earlier, and in fact, I'd stopped to check out the same exact things. How did she know I'd been there? Was she watching me before we met up? I didn't ask her about it. I didn't want to seem paranoid. But the whole thing started feeling a little off. We kept moving through the festival, and the clues kept getting more specific. Places I'd been, things I'd looked at. I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew more about me than she should. It wasn't just that the clues were precise. It was the way she acted. She seemed to be taking this game so seriously, like it wasn't just fun for her, it was something else. At one point, she handed me a clue that told us to go to a small cafe a few blocks away. I'd been there earlier in the week, meeting a friend. I hadn't told Emma about it, and I definitely didn't post anything about it online. How could she know? My mind started racing. Was she stalking me? Had she been following me around before we even met? I didn't want to accuse her of anything. I tried to play it cool, but I was beginning to feel uncomfortable. This wasn't just a game anymore. It felt like something bigger, like she was playing some kind of mind game with me, and I didn't know the rules. The last clue took us to a park I jogged through earlier that week. I had been there alone, just clearing my head, and Emma had no reason to know I was there. But she led me straight to it. I thought, okay, this has to be a coincidence. Maybe she had been to these places too. Maybe she just knew the area well. I was trying to rationalize it, but the more I thought about it, the worse it felt. When we arrived at the park, she stopped and turned to me with a smile that I didn't quite trust. I know where you've been, she said, like she was sharing some sort of secret. That was the moment. The moment my gut told me that this was no longer a fun game. The smile on her face, the way she said it, everything felt off. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. This wasn't some cute scavenger hunt. She knew too much about me. She had been to places I had been to, without me ever mentioning them. I felt like I was in a horror movie, and I was the unsuspecting victim. Her next words hit me like a ton of bricks. I've been there too. I know everything about you. I froze. The park felt too quiet, too empty. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, and for the first time all night, I felt like I was in real danger. My mind was racing. How could she know all this stuff about me? What did she want? Was she some kind of stalker, or was there something even darker going on? I don't know what it was. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was just fear. But in that moment, I knew I needed to get away from her. I didn't know who she was or what she wanted, but I couldn't stay there any longer. I turned around and started walking away, fast. I wasn't even thinking anymore. I just knew I had to leave. I heard her call my name behind me, but I didn't stop. My feet moved faster, and I didn't care if I was being rude. I didn't care if she thought I was overreacting. I needed to get out of there. I finally made it to my car, slammed the door shut, and locked it. I sat there for a moment, breathing heavily, trying to calm myself down. I didn't know what had just happened. I didn't know what was real and what was part of some weird game she was playing. But I knew I couldn't trust her anymore. I didn't hear from Emma the rest of the night. I went home and locked every door, checked every window. I was too paranoid to sleep. I felt like someone was watching me, even though I was alone in my apartment. It was like the walls were closing in. Every little sound made me jump. I kept checking the locks, making sure everything was secure. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there. The next day, I got a text from Emma. It was simple, just one line. You can't escape the game. I blocked her number immediately. I deleted my Tinder account. I wanted nothing to do with her. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. What had just happened? Was it a coincidence, or had I really been stalked? Had Emma been following me all week, or was I just losing my mind? I haven't seen her since that night, but every time I'm out at a festival or walking through a park, I can't shake the feeling that she's out there, watching me. I don't know what game she's playing or what her intentions were, but I can't forget what she said, that she knew everything about me. And I don't know if I'll ever feel So here's the deal. What happened to me that night wasn't normal, and I'm still struggling to wrap my head around it. Honestly, I'm not even sure if I should be telling anyone about it. But after everything that happened, I think it's important to share, if only to warn people about how things that seem too perfect can sometimes be a bit too perfect. It all started on Tinder, just like any other date. I was scrolling through the app, mostly for the fun of it, not expecting anything serious. My last relationship had ended a few months ago, and I wasn't really looking for anything major, but hey, I figured it couldn't hurt to chat with a few people. Enter Emily. Her profile was pretty standard, some cute selfies, a few shots from what looked like vacations, and a bio that said, "Love good food, good vibes, and bad jokes." Seemed like someone who didn't take herself too seriously, and I liked that. We started chatting, and within a few messages, I could tell she was funny, witty, and genuinely down to earth. Our conversations flowed easily, and after a couple of days of texting, we decided to meet for drinks. I remember walking into the bar that night. The place was one of those cozy spots downtown with dim lights and soft jazz playing in the background. Nothing too fancy, just a casual setting for a first date. I scanned the room, and sure enough, I saw her. She was sitting at the bar, looking around with a sort of nervous energy about her, but when our eyes met, she smiled. It wasn't a big, exaggerated smile, just a warm, welcoming one. We greeted each other, and I sat down. Right away, I noticed how beautiful she was, not just the typical beauty that's plastered on a magazine cover, but something more genuine. Her eyes were captivating, and her smile had this natural charm that made you feel at ease. As we started chatting, I realized something. She didn't just look like someone I could have a great time with. She felt like someone I had already known for a long time. I couldn't explain it, but there was an instant connection. We started talking about random things, our jobs, what we did in our free time, where we'd been traveling recently. And I noticed something strange. Every time I mentioned something personal, like a trip I had taken or an embarrassing moment I had, she would chime in with something eerily similar. I'm talking exactly similar. Like, I mentioned I'd spent a weekend hiking with friends in the mountains, and she immediately told me about her recent trip to the same area with the same group size. At nearly the same time, my stomach did a weird little flip, but I didn't think much of it. It could just be coincidence, right? Maybe we'd both been to the same places. It's not that unusual. But the more we talked, the more I realized just how many things we had in common. We both had the same favorite band, liked the same kind of movies, even watched the same weird true crime documentaries. I was starting to feel like I was talking to a mirror image of myself. It was fun at first, but it was also kind of unnerving. The more we laughed and bonded over our shared likes, the more this nagging feeling crept in the back of my mind. It was like I was talking to someone who already knew me, who already understood me. She was just too in tune with everything I liked. After a few drinks, I jokingly said, "You're starting to sound like me. Are you sure we didn't date in a past life?" I meant it as a funny comment, something to break the tension and keep the night light. But her reaction threw me off. She didn't laugh. She didn't even smile. Instead, she just looked at me with this calm, steady gaze and said, "That's because I'm everything you want me to be." I froze for a second. I thought maybe I had misheard her or that she was just messing with me. But she didn't seem like she was joking. Her tone was flat, almost too serious. It felt like there was something deeper behind her words, something more sinister that I couldn't quite place. I forced a nervous laugh, trying to shake off the oddness of her statement, but the vibe had changed. What had once been a lighthearted conversation now felt strangely uncomfortable. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was probably just a weird comment. But as we continued talking, I started to feel like she was reading my mind. She would finish my sentences or respond to things I hadn't even said out loud yet. It wasn't just the words, it was her movements too. If I shifted in my chair, she'd do the same. If I took a sip of my drink, she'd do the same thing at the exact same time. She mirrored my gestures in this weird, automatic way that I couldn't ignore. It was as if she was copying everything I did, almost like a reflection. It wasn't normal. By the time dessert came around, I was genuinely starting to get weirded out. I hadn't even told her where I worked yet, but when I mentioned it, she casually dropped in that she used to work at the same company. And then she mentioned a project that I had been on just last year. She knew details about it, specifics I hadn't told her about. I felt the blood drain from my face as I realized she was more connected to my life than she should have been. When we left the restaurant, she insisted on walking me to my car. I didn't think much of it though, because honestly, she'd been so nice the entire night. And I was still trying to convince myself I was just being paranoid. But as we walked outside, my heart skipped a beat when I saw her car parked right next to mine. We hadn't talked about where we had parked. I hadn't mentioned anything about where I'd left my car, and yet there it was, right next to mine, the exact same spot. I tried to brush it off, but I couldn't. Something felt deeply wrong now. When we said our goodbyes, I thought I could finally relax, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The whole night kept replaying in my mind. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt so uneasy. I got into my car, locked the door, and drove home quickly, all the while feeling like I wasn't quite alone. I tried to forget about it. Maybe I was overthinking it, I thought. Maybe she was just a very good listener or someone who shared a lot of my experiences. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, but I still couldn't stop thinking about her words, "I'm everything you want me to be." When I got home, I opened up Tinder just to check if she had texted me, but there was nothing. No message, no new notifications. I figured she was probably just giving me space, but I couldn't stop myself from looking at her profile one last time. I wanted to see her pictures again, or maybe find something to explain what had just happened. Except, her profile was gone. There was no trace of Emily anywhere on Tinder. Her name didn't show up when I searched for it. No photos, no account, nothing. It was like she'd completely vanished. At first, I thought it was some kind of glitch, but I tried searching for her on social media, Facebook, Instagram, even LinkedIn, and there was no sign of her anywhere. No posts, no tags, nothing. I went back to Tinder and checked my match list, hoping I had just missed something, but no. She wasn't there anymore. No profile, no messages, nothing. It was like she had never existed. I felt like I was losing my mind. How could that happen? How could she disappear so completely? I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't. I still had that nagging feeling in my chest that something was terribly wrong, and no matter how much I wanted to forget about her and move on, I kept thinking about her, about the way she seemed to know everything about me, about how she mirrored my every movement and thought. It's been a while now, and I haven't heard from her, and honestly, I don't want to, but I can't stop thinking about that night. Was she a real person, or something else? Did she know things about me that she shouldn't have? And why did she disappear so suddenly? Maybe I'll never know. But every time I hear someone mention mirroring behavior or talk about someone becoming exactly what you want them to be, I can't help but think of Emily. I still don't know what the hell happened that night, and maybe I'm better off not knowing, but I'll never forget her words, "I'm everything you want me to be." And that, in itself, is the most terrifying thing of all. I've thought about that night a million times, trying to piece it all together, trying to make sense of something that doesn't really make sense. Even now, months later, I can't stop thinking about it. I still get that cold feeling in the pit of my stomach when I remember what happened. I know it sounds insane, but I swear it's all true. It felt like some kind of nightmare I couldn't wake up from. If anything, it's been a lesson in how things can be so far from what they seem, and how you can't always trust your own eyes or your own instincts. It all started with a Tinder match, the kind of thing that happens every day, the kind of thing you don't think much about. I wasn't looking for anything serious. My relationship had just ended, and I was trying to move on or at least distract myself. So I downloaded Tinder, scrolled through the profiles like most people do when they're bored or curious. And then I saw him. His name was Ryan. His pictures were what you'd expect. He looked like the kind of guy who was laid back, easy to talk to, and totally at ease with himself. There was one picture of him on a beach, laughing with friends, another one where he was sitting at a cafe with a coffee in hand, looking off into the distance, probably pretending to be deep in thought. I liked the vibe he was giving off, so I swiped right. Within a few hours, we were texting. Nothing serious, just casual conversation at first. He was funny, a little sarcastic in that cute, playful way. He asked me about my job, my hobbies, and I shared some random stuff about myself. The usual first date topics. I didn't think much of it, but there was something in the back of my mind telling me to be cautious. Maybe it was just because I was still fresh out of a relationship, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for this. But still, we kept talking, and the more we talked, the more I felt like I knew him. It wasn't that he was doing anything out of the ordinary. It was more like he was familiar somehow. It wasn't a "I've met you before" kind of familiar, but a "you remind me of someone" kind of familiar. And the more I thought about it, the more it bothered me. He didn't look like anyone I knew, but something about his personality, the way he spoke, made me feel like I'd heard it all before. A week later, we decided to meet up for a drink. It was a Wednesday, so nothing too crazy. I wasn't expecting anything beyond some light conversation and maybe a good laugh. We agreed on a bar downtown that I had been to a few times before. It was small, dimly lit, not too busy. Perfect for a first date. I arrived a little early, grabbed a drink at the bar, and tried to relax. But I couldn't shake that feeling, the feeling that something was off. It wasn't like I was nervous, but I kept checking my phone, wondering if I'd even recognize him when he walked in. And then he did. Ryan walked into the bar, and for a second, my mind went blank. I had seen his pictures, of course, but in person he was different. He looked exactly like my ex. Exactly. The same dark eyes, the same messy brown hair, the same slightly crooked smile that always made me laugh when we were together. For a moment, I stood there frozen. There was no mistaking it. He looked so much like him. It wasn't just the hair or the smile, but the way he carried himself. The way he looked around the room as he walked in, it was the same. My heart skipped a beat, and my stomach dropped. I couldn't breathe for a moment, and I had to remind myself to keep it together. I forced myself to smile when he looked over at me, and he waved. I waved back and stood up, trying to act casual, even though my mind was racing. This isn't possible, I thought. This is just a coincidence. People look alike all the time, right? He came over, sat down, and we started talking. I tried to focus on the conversation, but all I could think about was how much he looked like my ex. It was weird. I'd only been broken up for a few months, and it felt like I was sitting across from him, like nothing had changed. But Ryan wasn't my ex. He was a different person. He had his own life, his own stories, his own past. I tried to remind myself of that, but every time I looked at him, it felt like something in my mind was trying to make me believe otherwise. He didn't look like a stranger. He looked like someone who had been in my life before, and it made me uneasy. We talked about the usual things: work, hobbies, books, movies. Nothing too deep, nothing that could explain the feeling of déjà vu that kept creeping up on me. But then, things started to take a strange turn. Ryan started bringing up details of my life that I hadn't shared with him, things that felt way too personal, too intimate. He mentioned my favorite childhood pet by name. He knew where I went to college, even though I hadn't told him. He knew I had once spent an entire summer working at a cafe, even though I'd never mentioned it. The more he talked, the more I felt like I was losing control of the situation. How did he know all of this? I hadn't told him a thing about any of it. He even started to mention moments from my past, specific moments that no one else would have known. He mentioned a hiking trail I used to go to when I was younger, a place I hadn't been to in years. He smiled as he spoke, almost like he was proud of himself for remembering. It wasn't just that he knew these details, it was the way he talked about them. He didn't seem surprised or confused. He spoke about them with a sense of ownership, like he had a right to know everything about me. It was unsettling. My stomach twisted with anxiety, and I started to feel trapped. I tried to laugh it off, thinking maybe he was just being nice, trying to connect with me in some way. But it wasn't normal, and the worst part was that I couldn't figure out why I felt so uncomfortable. It wasn't that he was being weird in a gross way. It was the opposite. He was being too perfect. He was saying all the right things, and it made my mind race even faster. Then, in the middle of the conversation, he said something that made my blood run cold. I've waited so long to do this right. The words hung in the air, and I couldn't breathe for a moment. I froze. My mind was reeling, trying to process what he meant. What was he talking about? Why did those words sound so familiar? Why did they feel like a warning? I couldn't get the words out fast enough. My voice felt tight in my throat, but I had to ask. I needed to know what he meant. What do you mean? I asked, trying to sound calm. But instead of answering, Ryan just smiled. His eyes glinted like he knew something I didn't. It was the same smile that used to make me feel at ease with my ex, but now it only made me feel sick to my stomach. I excused myself to go to the bathroom. I needed space to think, to breathe. I had to get out of there. I didn't understand what was happening, but I felt like I needed to get away from him before I started saying or doing something I'd regret. When I got back, the seat across from me was empty. Ryan was gone. I stood there for a second, feeling disoriented. Was I imagining things? Was I losing my mind? I looked around the bar, but there was no sign of him. It didn't make sense. He was just sitting there. He couldn't have left without me seeing him. I walked up to the bartender, trying to stay calm, but my heart was pounding in my chest. "Where did the guy sitting here go?" I asked, my voice trembling. The bartender looked at me with confusion. "What guy?" he asked. "There's no one sitting here." I felt like I was in some kind of weird, twisted dream. There was no way he could have disappeared that quickly. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something was wrong. Something wasn't adding up. I had to leave. I grabbed my purse and rushed out of the bar, trying to keep my composure, but my mind was spinning. I couldn't make sense of what had just happened. I don't know why, but I had a feeling someone was following me as I walked to my car. Every step felt like someone was right behind me. Every shadow felt like it was hiding someone watching me. When I got to my car, I locked the doors and sat there for a few minutes, trying to calm down. My heart was still racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, but I didn't want to overreact. Maybe it was just nerves. Maybe I was just still shaken from the date, but it didn't stop there. The next day, I got a text. It was from an unknown number. Remember me? I didn't respond, but then another message came. I've waited too long for this. It made no sense. Who was this? How did they know me? I didn't know what to do. I deleted the messages, blocked the number, and tried to go about my life. But the texts kept coming. They were strange, cryptic, and unsettling. You're just like her, one of them said. You're more like her than you know. I didn't know who her was, but I had a feeling I wasn't going to like finding out. Then came the photo, a picture of my apartment building. It was taken from across the street, and the caption simply read, "I've been waiting for this moment." I freaked out. I blocked the number and deleted everything I could think of, but I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched, like someone was lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. I left town for a few weeks, just to get away from everything, but even then, I couldn't shake the feeling. It was like I was living in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. To this day, I don't know who Ryan was, or why he looked exactly like my ex. I don't know who sent those texts or why they knew so much about me. All I know is that whatever happened that night, it wasn't a coincidence, and I don't think I'll ever understand it. But one thing's for sure, I'll never forget it. I didn't expect much from my Tinder date with Monica. Honestly, I thought it would be just like every other date I'd had in the past. Awkward small talk, maybe a laugh or two, and a polite goodbye at the end. But what happened that night was far from ordinary, and I'm still not sure if I should have seen it coming. It all started like any other Tinder conversation. We matched, exchanged a few messages, and agreed to meet up at a local bar. Monica seemed cool enough, funny, a little sarcastic, and not too pushy. Her profile said she loved hiking and trying new restaurants, so I figured we'd at least have some decent things to talk about. I wasn't expecting fireworks or anything, just a casual hangout. The date itself was fine, but not great. We met at the bar, and after the initial, "Hey, nice to meet you," and awkward small talk, things quickly went downhill. Monica wasn't a terrible person, but she wasn't my type either. She spent way too much time talking about her job, something that I couldn't even pretend to care about, and I kept trying to steer the conversation elsewhere. It wasn't working. She was nice enough, but I just wasn't feeling any chemistry. I tried to be polite, though, because I hate the idea of hurting someone's feelings, especially when they're trying to make a good impression. But in the back of my mind, I knew this was a one-and-done kind of date. After a couple of drinks, I politely told her I wasn't interested in a second date. She seemed fine with it, though she didn't exactly hide her disappointment. We finished our drinks, and I told her I was going to head home. I remember feeling a little relieved as I walked out of the bar, thinking that this would just be one of those forgettable experiences that you look back on and chuckle about later. But then things started to get weird. As I walked back to my car, I glanced over my shoulder and noticed Monica's car parked across the street. I didn't think too much of it at first. I figured she was just hanging around for a bit, maybe texting someone or waiting for the traffic to clear. But when I got in my car and started driving home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It was just a weird gut feeling, but I couldn't ignore it. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I was just overthinking things. I live in a pretty quiet apartment complex, and as I pulled into the parking lot, I glanced over at Monica's car. It was still there. I didn't think much of it, figuring she'd probably left already. But when I parked and got out of my car, I saw it again. Her car was still parked right outside the entrance of my building. Now, I wasn't sure if this was just coincidence or if something was off, but my stomach sank. I told myself to calm down. She probably wasn't following me. Maybe she had a friend who lived nearby or something and I was just being paranoid. But I had to admit, it was strange. I had told her I was going home, but I never mentioned where I lived. There was no reason for her to be parked there unless she'd followed me. I went inside and tried to brush it off. I locked the door behind me, changed into my pajamas, and sat down to watch some TV. But every time I glanced out the window, my eyes were drawn to the same spot. Her car was still there, parked in the same spot. An hour passed. I couldn't concentrate on anything. My mind kept going back to the car. Was she really just sitting there waiting? What was she doing? I felt stupid for not being more cautious. I mean, this was exactly the kind of situation that my friends always warned me about, meeting random people from Tinder, not knowing who they really are. But I thought I'd been careful. I wasn't giving her my address, and I had made sure to keep the conversation light. Finally, around PM, I decided I'd had enough. I needed to confront her. If nothing else, I wanted to make sure she knew that this wasn't okay. I grabbed my phone, called a friend to make sure someone knew what was going on, and stepped outside. I didn't know if she was still in her car or not, but I was done letting the situation get to me. I walked down the stairs of my building and across the parking lot toward her car. I'll never forget the way she looked when she saw me approaching. It was like she was expecting me. Her car was still parked right in front of my building, and there she was, sitting inside with her seat slightly reclined, looking up at me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I took a deep breath and knocked on her window. She rolled it down slowly, almost like she was waiting for me to say something first. When I asked her what she was doing here, she gave me this calm, almost rehearsed response. She said she just wanted to make sure I got home safely. But that didn't sit right with me. I had never told her where I lived. I never gave her my address. There was no way she could have known where I was unless she'd followed me. I asked her how she knew where I lived, but she just smiled and said she was just being polite. I was stunned. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I stood there staring at her, trying to figure out if I was overreacting or if this was something I should really be concerned about. There was this weird calmness about her, like she wasn't fazed at all by the situation. It was almost as if she expected me to be okay with it, but I wasn't, and that's when the adrenaline kicked in. I told her to leave, and I went back inside as quickly as I could. I locked the door and made sure every window was shut tight, but the whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The next few hours were a blur. I couldn't sleep. I kept looking out the window, checking to see if her car was still parked outside. It was. I didn't feel safe. I had no idea what to do. I tried texting a couple of friends, but they were all asleep, and I didn't want to worry anyone. I figured I'd just wait it out, but I couldn't stop thinking about how unsettling the whole thing had been. I felt completely exposed, like my privacy had been invaded in a way that I couldn't ignore. I remember my heart racing whenever I heard a sound coming from outside. It was almost like I was waiting for her to show up at my door. I'd peek out the blinds expecting her to be standing there, but every time, nothing. I didn't want to open the door and find out what would happen. I was torn between wanting to confront her and just staying out of sight, praying she would leave and never come back. Finally, I decided to call the police. I didn't know what else to do. They weren't much help, though. They told me to keep an eye out, but they didn't take the situation seriously. She could have just been worried about you, they said. Maybe she wanted to make sure you got home okay. But that didn't sit right with me. I told them that I hadn't given her any information, that she couldn't have known where I lived unless she was following me. They just brushed it off as a misunderstanding. When I woke up the next morning, I saw that her car was finally gone. I don't think I realized how much tension had built up inside me until that moment. I felt a little bit safer, but not by much. The unease still lingered in the pit of my stomach. I didn't hear from Monica again. I didn't expect to, and part of me felt relieved that she had just vanished. But another part of me couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. It's hard to explain, but I just couldn't let go of that nagging feeling that she wasn't done with me. Over the next few days, I kept thinking about the whole thing. Monica's strange behavior, the way she followed me home, the way she acted like it was all perfectly normal, it haunted me. I started to wonder if she had done this before. How many other people had she stalked after a date? What if I wasn't the first? What if I wouldn't be the last? I couldn't get the image of her smiling at me from the car window out of my head. There was something deeply unsettling about her calmness. It was like she knew she had power over me, and that thought made my skin crawl. I deleted my Tinder account the next day. The whole experience just made me feel dirty. I'd never felt so violated by a stranger, especially someone who seemed so harmless at first. I didn't want to deal with online dating anymore. It wasn't worth the risk. I haven't seen Monica since that night, but every now and then I'll look out the window and wonder if she's still out there, waiting for me to slip up, waiting for me to trust her again. It's a strange feeling, knowing that someone out there has watched you and knows more about you than they should. But I'm not making that mistake again. And if anyone reading this is thinking of going on a Tinder date or meeting someone for the first time, just be careful. You never know what someone is really like, what they're capable of. And sometimes the most normal-looking people can be the most dangerous. But what I do know is that after that night, my whole outlook on safety changed. My trust in people, especially strangers, is a lot more fragile now. I've learned not to take anything at face value. What may look harmless on the surface could be hiding something far more dangerous underneath. I've heard stories like mine from other people, but when it happens to you, it shakes you to your core in ways you can't fully explain. I'll never forget the night Monica followed me home, the terror of realizing I was no longer in control, that she knew things about me that I hadn't shared, that she had been watching my every move, and I'll never let my guard down again. The world can be full of normal people, people who look just like anyone else, but you can't always trust appearances. Some might be quietly studying you, learning your habits, waiting for the right moment to take action. It's a chilling thought, but it's a reality now that I live with. So from now on, I'm always cautious, always aware, because when something feels off, it usually is.